In the evening, at the local Apex Club, they served cheese, cold drinks, and food with Eastern dressing. In harsh weather on the black asphalt of the VIP parking lot, yellowed leaves were scattered, mixed with fine debris and dust. When the parking area leveled out, they rarely managed to save the famous King Twilight guest house. Light radiated from a single glowing lamp, making a ritual hum at the base of the ceiling, revealing a long, falling ceiling onto concrete walls. Right there, near an open-air pit box, stood a red sports car with a powerful V8 engine. The front of the open hood fitted the man well. He wore a worn jacket with greasy sleeves stained with fuel oil, working trousers, and old boots with wide toes. A faded baseball cap was pulled low over his head, completely hiding the upper part of his face. The man's hands, starting from the fingers of the same lock, were covered in black grease and oil emulsion. In his primary hand was a precise surgical instrument, adjusting the force of the valves in the engine's valve mechanism. Thus, keeping this man away from the timber cutter, for which a lot of money had been paid, was necessary. A guy from the famous luxurious Mimo Eagles car couldn't do this before adding soap to Tom, the very same man who was at work. For Damir Vorontsov, his name had become synonymous with success. He collaborated with leading mid-tier banks and major construction companies. One of the Union Eagles of the transnational financial holding Vorontsov Group had attracted billions of dollars in capital. Last month, Damir became the absolute successor to all cars in the Formula April series. He bought it entirely, from racetracks, media rights, and branding to production. Both driver and controlling shares were actively held by him as the commander. For Damir, working with metal was a way to step away from the world of high-level politics and big business. The sound of a running engine was better than happy partners at social gatherings. He loved repairing cars himself. Now that it was made of metal, he didn't need to worry about it. The job was done. The engine had to come first before moving. The silence of the parking lot was suddenly shattered by the deafening screech of burning rubber. The sound was cut off so sharply that it echoed off the concrete arches. On the lower level, at maximum speed, arrived a bright yellow recent model Lamborghini. The car didn't need to detach from the roads, as there were no steering columns. In the three-seater sports car, there was a lock on the metallic display, and in front of Damir's pit box, it was about to meet the star. The door to the lounge opened, revealing a young couple in a white designer tracksuit, trendy shoes, and luxury delivery gold watches. This was Arthur Gromov, a driver on 2 horses, the eldest son of developer Viktor Gromov. Arthur was one of the stars of the Formula April series, and, concurrently, a spoiled youth accustomed to having any whim fulfilled instantly, with every mistake covered by his father's checks. In Arthur's hand was a paper cup of hot latte. His face was framed by the front of the sports car, and a glowing carabiner left behind after a botched maneuver upon entering. "Hey, you! Garbage collector!" Arthur shouted, stepping straight toward Damir and disgustedly examining his dirty clothes. "What kind of snow are you waiting for? What did you say? What did you do?" Damir was a minor away from a serious crime. After the fence was treated, the tool was thoroughly cleaned once that hand was removed. Turning his head, he calmly looked at the agitated youth. "I was sitting on the floor, pal," Damir said, his work being a short, velvety, unhurried voice. "2 cars aren't used to my pit box. With half the table, you can move at speed before you reach it, kilometers on the speedometer. Make sure you drive if you're afraid of this taboo." "What did you say?" Arthur squealed, losing control at such a tone. "How mockingly you speak, you pauper. Do you know what kind of school is in this car? For your whole life, you've never held this much money in your hands." At that moment, emotions were clearly visible on the young man's face. Lacking the big picture, Arthur threw his special cup straight into Damir's chest. Hot coffee soaked into the thin fabric of the old work shirt. The liquid was crucial to the clothing, and just like in a big office, it caused sharp pain. Damir didn't panic. He looked down, saw his ruined shirt, then looked back up. Soon, he looked at Arthur. In this case, there was no meaning, no pain, no offense. To be the king of the Iceman, he had saved his soul through the corporation with a single stroke of a pen. Arthur was an island of neophytes to which flights did not apply. In his hasty rage, he decided to press even harder. "Are you saying you stopped?" Arthur written, cutting his hands near the billionaire's very nose. "I am Arthur Gromov, the best pilot of the Formula April series. My friend owns this car and organized this whole thing, and you're just dirt under my wheels. Put the fuse on the rim, raise the handle, and trim a centimeter off my wheel disc. After you clean one of the vacuum cleaners, you can clean it out of here too, and you'll be sweeping station toilets for the rest of your days. Following the sound, people became excited. In the VIP zone were other club guests, famous young men and women buying drinks, along with several guardians. This was not the case, but it hadn't been reported prior to the preliminary acquaintance. On the contrary, upstairs there were funny things. People pulled out their phones, watched videos, and saw a horse humiliating a middle-aged man in work coveralls. Go on, film this tramp, Arthur laughed, feeling the support of the crowd. What time is it? Before the boxing match, Arthur was mostly worried about the metal windshield and hot water. In the shop, hot water was piped right down to Damir's boots and pants. No embellishments. In 3 minutes, my people will be thrilled. Damir took a deep breath. As soon as you get there, you can publish it in less than a second. Now you need to use the device to understand. The system, with a crackle, also meant that from an early age, there was no end to this. What is your sponsor's name? Damir asked softly. Ha! My father is Viktor Gromov. He represents this parking lot, this club, and you to boot. What are you saying? To the police? The best of you can be eaten in the oven. Call whoever you want. Damir didn't need to go to the airport. On a pole in his backpack pocket and on an old phone was a protective satellite chip. Dialing a short number, he held the receiver to his ear. The sound was heard before the noise. The voice belonged to Igor Seleznev, Vice President of the Vorontsov Group and CEO of the Intermediate Automobile Federation. Damir Nikolaevich, I'm here. Did something happen? Seleznev's voice contained sound and a joyful message. Damir read the word twice, and there it was. Igor, we went to the floating parking lot of the Apex Club. Another driver in the Formula April series, Arthur Gromov. Hearing this, Arthur said, Oh, I'm choking with laughter. He's calling his janitor friend. Yeah, before you leave, let me ride again and clean the room. The head of a horse galloping through the snow uttered a piercing cry behind a smile. Most importantly, Damir Nikolaevich, is the dynamics. Take down these instructions, Damir continued, looking straight into Arthur's eyes. First, revoke driver Arthur Gromov's super license, for life, without the need for closure or production. Publish his portrait across all favorite official and unofficial federal competitions. Place him on the exclusion list for all racetracks in the world. As if on top of a steel table, Arthur's head was raised. What a lunatic. Revoking a license. Who are you? My father can buy both balls. Front, without a hint of criticism, said the voice named Damir. Terminate absolutely all sponsorship and partnership contracts with the developer Gromov Invest. Recall all credit lines granted to Viktor Gromov by our head bank. Demand early repayment of all current loans within 24 hours. Execution deadline, 10 minutes. Time is short. When Damir pressed the button, the phone was in his pocket, ready for use. A wooden compartment for spare parts, in other words, hands on the wheel. What, are you completely confused? Arthur placed his hands on Damir's palms. Is that how you lived? Do you need to clean my wheel that you broke? Arthur, like Damir, was not in the same position. Inside the case lay a golden phone. On the screen, the text glowed brightly. OTZ. The driver pressed his finger to the screen, loudly uttering, This is the most important toilet. Hey, Dad, so you don't need to come to the parking lot, but security remains at the same level. Shut up, you idiot. Viktor Gromov's voice boomed from the speaker, drowning out the hum of the ventilation system. Where are you? What have you done? Arthur froze. His smile vanished instantly. Dad, what's wrong? At the Apex parking lot? A good idea to work. Shut up, the voice shouted, turning into a rasp through the speaker. Seleznev just called me. Our accounts are frozen. Vorontsov's bank has demanded the immediate repayment of a $70 million loan. My construction license was revoked 5 minutes ago. Your racing license was erased from the database forever. Who is in front of you? Who are you talking to? Arthur was a big believer. The phone in his hands was about to be sent off. Dad, too bad for a man in a work jacket. Fool! Viktor Gromov's voice carried like in a church. That is Damir Vorontsov. He owns the entire holding. He bought the whole racing series last week. He owns our bank. I'm on my way. Don't move. If he doesn't forgive you, I will destroy you myself." The call cut off. An absolute dead silence hung over the underground parking lot. All the girls held their mobile phones. The heroic couple was constantly approaching the mechanic, making it crucial to back away. All eyes in the parking lot were fixed on the unmistakable man in the jacket with a short coffee cup covering his chest. On the side of the wooden box, one could see the dials of steel watches and burners. After the parking lot, Arthur sat down and examined his plant's leg. The white suit he wore was certainly very hot. The phone peeked out from under his palms, lying on the concrete rather than with his father. But that didn't mean that. The rider's gaze turned with terror toward Damir Vorontsov. Are you Damir Nikolaevich?" Arthur stammered, his voice turning into a sharp squeak. Damir didn't go to hell. He pulled a paper napkin from his pocket and quickly wiped his grease-stained fingers. "In your hotel, you see 2 discs," said the billion-dollar red sound. "Timing is right, Arthur. In 3 minutes, there will be no windows." The onlookers quickly shoved their devices into their pockets. The girls walked over to the truck and rested in the dark parking lot. There was no hotel a person could see, but it was as much as possible. The wrath of the country's most powerful financial tycoon had descended. I didn't mean to. Sir, I swear, I didn't know," Arthur stammered, his wheels already spinning out of control. "They told me some local mechanic was digging around here. I was just joking. Let's take a break." "A joke?" Damir opened his eyes once. "A man enjoying hot coffee realizes himself before the visitors. It was a terrible end to your life once you died." "Is poverty a reason for mockery to you, Arthur?" No, forgive me." Arthur burst into tears. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. I'll buy you new clothes. Name any amount." "He doesn't have that much money, Arthur," Damir said. "You two are here and there, just like last year. Every minute your family goes to the bank. That means you don't need to buy me a pack of sachets." At that moment, a black Mercedes S-Class screeched to a halt in the parking lot. The car hadn't been pulled from the high-speed truck's cabin. In a rustic suit, Viktor Gromov. His face was pale, his tie undone, his breathing an outright panic attack. Parking for 2 seconds, Viktor killed Damir sitting next to him in storage, and your son had a cord with a face-length growth. Less than a second later, the big developer ran up to Damir and collapsed onto his knees, right on the dirty concrete before him. "Damir Nikolaevich, Mr. Vorontsov, I beg you," Viktor pleaded, placing his hands on his ankles. "Have mercy. The boy is an idiot. There are no signs of where we've been. Don't worry about my whole life. Don't worry." The remaining witnesses in the parking lot gasped. Watching Viktor Gromov standing on the cleaner's floor before a man in a work robe was a sight that completely flipped reality upside down. "Dad," Arthur began, "go to the university." "Shut up!" Viktor roared without turning his head. "Get on your knees. Get down and ask for forgiveness, or I will disown you right here." Arthur lay leaning against the concrete ledge. His designer trousers were helping spread hot water across the world. "Damir Nikolaevich," Viktor's voice trembled with tears, "I am ready to pay any fine. Your company will share your strengths for free. Just don't take out the loan. Don't pay. My son is thrilled with the gift. If you take the car door, be sure to clean the toilets. Good day. Well, let my family perish." Damir deeply valued the storage box. Up on the mountain we have wallpaper, and the appearance of the wing can be cleaned of dust by father and son. "Viktor," Damir said coldly, "you're a sick man who reads what money you owe to other people is worthy. When you bought $1 million, you bought a sports car, but you learned nothing about that man. Over the next few days, you should know this is a cheap car. And how many real workers, cleaners, and breadwinners did he trample the next day? Young people surely have a poster protecting their money from their responsibility." Viktor milked a lobster in another threatening palm. All of us, every single one. Your 2 sons will never, ever get behind the wheel of a race car. Your license has been revoked forever, Damir verified. As for your company, I won't completely bankrupt you. It doesn't matter that your successful work in both companies is free from the labor of its two sons. Viktor covered his face with his hands, his eyes flashing. Have fun.
Have fun, Damir Nikolaevich. No, Damir passed along. You will reduce the company's stake in the back of the car and the maintenance of the orphanage. You read about the CEO position, and this business controls many famous Soviet directors. And your son, Damir turned back to Arthur, both sons of the second child are in the best condition, an addition to the main car series. On the floor, they will wash toilets, clean the stands, and polish the wheels of real racers' cars. 6 days a week for minimum wage. If you want one day off or go into rudeness, both companies will go under the hammer. That is my final word. Arthur spoke in a voice that said Viktor was afraid for his son, and his son's face imprinted in the concrete. Thank you, sir. Fun. He will work. On the floor. Please, remember everything. Damir grew up, said nothing, and asked his heart. On the wheel, a powerful engine, and the motor started. Another spoiled brat.
Damir drove into the parking lot, and after a short break, pride was concluded. The main lesson of this night: real power lies not in money nor in status, but in time. That's what matters. If you are a human being, you have nothing to worry about. At the end of the day, you saw the Vorontsov arena car with air-processed cheese parked on the black asphalt racetrack. The cold rain was warmed by the wind, drying the metallic structure of the water stand. At this time, one of the city's elite nightclubs was located right next to the doors of the racing complex. The racing complex is your life. For Arthur Gromov, the most important day of his life was crossing out the past, presenting a new view of the world. On the floor of the technical shop, every day at home, a silk robe, a soft bed, and fragrance. Perfume was never used for smoking, made entirely of synthetic materials, distinguished by its thoughtfulness and massiveness. Boots with sharp metal studs in the toes. Clothes don't stick to the bag, but fabric doesn't stick to skin either. After reading, Stepan Kuzmich turned out to be the star of the racetrack, a 60-year-old man with a tobacco-stained mustache, deep wrinkles, a weathered face, and a healthy look beneath bushy eyebrows. Kuzmich had tested on the track for over 2 years, both times as a pilot. Another important point was the price of the house brought onto this route. A story with an unprecedented name. Developer Viktor Gromov had a son born, and the very next evening, a surprise from the holding's main office. Now then, champion, Stepan Kuzmich spat slowly beneath Arthur's feet and folded his calloused hands across his chest. Thought you saw how girls ride in the VIP club? Well, second place is right over there. He pointed a handle toward a long row of toilets situated beneath the lower tier of the main grandstand. What you see, what you eat in chemical form, is what you eat and see. From the outside world, everyone's first practical experience of brilliance has arrived. If you need just one food lid or use non-toxic gases, I'll personally call Seleznev. What did you say, Father? Arthur said he heard what he heard. Inside him, a wild, desperate rage burned. You should visit the plastic window on the facade of the old factory, then take it down outside, sit in the city, and head into that town. Now when you hear the sound, you'll hear the voice. Yes, you'll break down. We're paupers. If you go into the city, you'll end up on the street without a dime. I understand, Arthur squeezed out through gritted teeth, looking up. Not I understand, but understood, Stepan Kuzmich. The supply manager raised his voice, stepping closer. Forward, march to work. Timing is right. Arthur was met with a harsh wind filled with icy water pushed by 2 disinfectant grate pumps. Chemical gases could be fed into the nose and thoroughly cleaned. On the wall, in the highest sanitary block, the dirt left behind by construction workers after yesterday's assembly scene triggered his gag reflex. The first hours were spent working in the neighborhood. Arthur Nikolai had never held a sword or a handle in his life. The tips of his perfectly manicured fingers took only a minute to become covered in blisters that quickly burst, oozing lymph for a long time. The chemical water felt like fire on his body. Now on the concrete floor, slipping was a funny topic, which is why every day people read about this in low quality. First of all, on the track, head to the first commanders. Minibuses carry mechanics, engineering teams, and pilots. The message was not a symbol for Arthur, young racers who were on the same wavelength. It was important to light a fire at an elite restaurant and wear a gold watch. Seeing Arthur in a bright orange cleaner's vest with a mop in hand, they froze. On their faces, bewilderment quickly gave way to mocking grins. "Hey Arthur," shouted one pilot, Mark, with whom he used to compete in the same racing zone. "Did you change sponsors? Has a new workwear collection dropped?" A group of riders set off. "Listen, Mr. Clean," added a second pilot passing by. "Out of 3 pit crews, you'll see. You're our chief of cleanliness now." Arthur was armed. Blood was meant for the man in the hospital. On the other hand, blades rested against the eyes. The hotel was close to the mark. You were in the middle of a mountain, not nearby. Stepan Kuzmich cleared his throat loudly, hinting at the phone in his pocket. Arthur tore his head away. He didn't answer. On the other hand, strength and snow were swept away by the wind into fresh water. Former buddies, after laughing and filming a couple of videos for their social media, walked past. That meant shoe boots could be placed on the upper part of the floor. The heavy rain intensified, affecting the residential zone as well. Arthur continued along the same route without trouble. The rear of the vehicle had to be thoroughly inspected, soaked with water, so that a chain could be pulled across the road and safely secured to the crash barrier. On the coast, ice conditions were being checked. Specialized clothing had to be issued every minute. Hands were so numb that the subtle feel of the wooden tool handles was barely perceptible. Mimo never accelerated to top speed to defeat racing cars that fell under its feet from fresh rainwater and small stones. As a result, the car was parked a couple of meters from Arthur. There was no airwave, so his legs weren't injured. In one of those cars, the commander gave an order to the patient. Arthur looked at the small, beast-like silhouette of the vehicle and its symbol, his own sword being destroyed. On the other hand, Nikolai didn't reach the wheel of the official company. It was essential to read about the queen of the world, who needed to know clearly that she was broken and buried beneath this routine, persistent labor. From the top of a 3-story wall looking at this picture stood Damir Vorontsov. By the panoramic glass, he held a steaming black cup in his hands. Behind him in the office, externally, "How about celebrating?" Damir asked dryly, turning his head. "It works," Seleznov said, reading data off a tablet screen. "There were direct consequences from provocation by other pilots. It's not obvious that the conflict is expressed. Instructions for the plant have been published in the main area. If there's blood in the blood, it won't work, and there won't be pain in it." "Don't tell me," Damir said, taking off his gloves. "Pride shatters strong wood. Once you finish, send your name to the company to the king. If you want to know about your life with a small scooter." To a large extent, educated youth can mature and grow up, taking responsibility for their actions. Damir raised his hand and walked over to his desk, where he engaged in upgrading the racetrack's infrastructure. This demonstrated the importance of this process in stepping up work. 3 months passed. At the start of the rainy season, bright snow fell. Work at the racetrack was still ongoing. The complex went into winter testing, and technical personnel had to follow the rules. Arthur Gromov took an interest in the novelty. On the weight loss simulator, the steel brace and body physically bore the load. Dry, rough calluses formed on his hands, and his face became weathered from the constant cold. The previously unstable youth was neither warm nor cold. On the other hand, there were no bright clothes, no perfume, and no such trends on social media. Today we are on the platform in 4 corners of the city, working by day, sleeping by night in a large room in the city of Krasnoyarsk, built on an island using the small wages of an assistant cleaner. At the hotel, they were impressed that this turned out not to be the case. Viktor Gromov, who held absolute control over the business, didn't preserve his life's work thanks to Damir Vorontsov's decision, but became a changed man. He didn't have to pay his son a lot of money. In the end, he was sent to the car. Viktor arrived at the shop and was born while his son cleaned the grandstands or collected boxes of spare parts. One day in December, private testing of new technologies took place in the pit box at the racetrack, creating an unpredictable situation. One of the vehicle's technical components was capable of transmitting deep telemetric data. Equipment mounting a hydraulic lift to the pit lane star was blocked, creating an extremely dangerous situation. A military crew of mechanics was servicing the cars, but Nick couldn't do it. A few minutes later, The engineer and commander were already yelling, while the drivers waited nervously to head out. Arthur wheeled Mimo over to an open trash cart. Next year, using the most advanced technical equipment on the racing car's auxiliary machinery, though he himself never got his hands dirty. In no time at all, the mechanism closed, indicating a swift fix for the breakdown, a misalignment of the distribution rod caused by frozen emulsion. Remove the side cap, bleed the pressure through the backup valve. Arthur's bushing and 2 dials connected to the coupling mechanisms. The chief mechanic of the crew, a man in coveralls, turned around and stared at the cleaner in surprise. "What are you talking about, kid? Go sweep your areas. Bleed the pressure, or the hydraulics will break when the pump kicks in," Arthur said. "There's also something related to the tractor design. If you read this again, it will stop." The old mechanic hesitated for a second. Assessing the situation, he grabbed a wrench, quickly unscrewed the indicated cap, and pressed the backup valve. The pump system bled out air and hydraulic fluid. The platform was built in the early stages of the procession. "Damn it," the mechanic muttered, wiping his brow with his sleeve. He looked at Arthur with a fresh, attentive gaze. "You actually know your stuff, kid. How do you know how it works?" "I was interested," Arthur said, having lived to the end of his life. "The carts are standing in the hallway without getting food." This episode did not go unnoticed. Stepan Kuzmich discovered a note about the scene in his work log at the end of the evening. For the past 5 months, Arthur had been working on a new device. Since cleaning wasn't required, the floor needed washing or scrubbing. On the contrary, under no circumstances should it be used to treat an illness, a person at this large facility. On this device, like a giant non-metallic apparatus for spectators, it was worth it. Secondly, the pilot moves along the route. That's how people, from senior engineers to professional engineers, work this wild mechanism. And he was part of this mechanism, even if at the very lowest level of his problem. One evening, as the racetrack was emptying out, Arthur lingered in the pit box to seal a box after winter testing. In the box stood one of the best Formula April cars from another series where they once competed. The parent sat in the car, put it on, and carefully checked the smoothness of the carbon wing with his fingers. There was no need for pain or heart in his chest. It was a great example of how much you love racing and mountain racing, Tom, as well as, on the other hand. "Is it time?" a man said in a quiet, conversational voice. Arthur, a mature and powerful planet. Damir Vorontsov appeared in the doorway of the pit box. The billionaire wore a simple jacket, holding an old tablet with running graphics in his hands. Arthur raised his hands and pressed them to his lips. "Forgive me, Mr. Vorontsov. I'm finishing up the cleaning. Every day, everything goes east." Soon, Damir was borne to the patient, able to intercept the ball from Arthur and return it to the small nose mechanisms. "Do you miss driving?" Damir asked without any pressure or force. "I miss it, sir," Arthur answered honestly, looking straight ahead. "Now you see, you're looking for a license. An idiot said he was fine. There's no such concept." Damir raised his head and walked over to the young man. On the other hand, the interpretation was this. In Arthur's eyes, there was nothing bad. They shone. His gaze had become firm and calm. His bruised, calloused hands held a heavy rag without the slightest hint of shame. "Have you learned to say goodbye, Arthur?" Vorontsov asked softly. "I've learned, sir. What matters is that, without these people, there's no such thing as a technical base." Damir remained silent. He made no grand statements or promises of leniency. "Right now, we're improving and targeting the pit box. Those same doors are located on the east side and, without equipment, produce..." Stepan Kuzmich said you understand hydraulics, so you won't have to move mechanics to the third garage during main shifts. If you write to your loved one, we'll see. Damir guessed on a dark winter evening, and Arthur had a good lunch after the pit box. The gym door was closed. Above all, a few months later, the shower was warmed by fire. Winter finally took full control, locking the Vorontsov Arena racetrack in a harsh shell of snow and crust. Piercing, icy winds blew right through the open spaces of the track. For most sports facilities, this period meant a lull, but for the country's primary motorsport base, the winter season was a time of brutal testing, tuning engineering systems, and preparing infrastructure for the upcoming spring championship. Transferring Arthur Gromov to assist the mechanics in garage number 3 after his main cleaning shift didn't mean leniency. On the contrary, his workday became 5 hours longer, finishing washing the sanitary blocks and clearing snow by the main grandstands by 4 in the afternoon. He immediately headed to the technical pit box, where impact wrenches clattered, burnt oil smelled, and welding sparks flew until late at night. The mechanics of garage number 3, grizzled men who had given 30 years of their lives to motorsport, met the former social media star with outright distrust. In their world, a person's worth was determined not by the cost of his watch or his follower count, but by his ability to feel metal, work to the point of exhaustion, and instantly make the right decisions in a critical situation. "Listen here, assistant," grunted the crew's chief mechanic, Uncle Kolya, a burly man with a graying beard and grease ground deep into his fingernails. "Vorontsov ordered us to give you a chance, but nobody's going to coddle you. Hand over wrenches, hold components during press fitting, drain used oil. Make a mistake, strip a thread on a titanium stud, and you'll fly right back to Stepan Kuzmich with a bang. Any questions?" "No questions, Nikolai Vasilievich," Arthur replied calmly, pulling on a heavy, oil-stained jumpsuit. The first weeks in garage number 3 were a test of endurance of an entirely different order for Arthur. While cleaning the stands required only monotonous physical strength, here, every single centimeter of work demanded absolute concentration. A mistake in tightening a bolt on a racing car's suspension meant risking a driver's life by sending him into a concrete wall at 300 kilometers per hour. Arthur's hands, which had barely healed from his first months of cleaning, were once again covered in scrapes, cuts, and burns from red-hot exhaust parts. He slept no more than 4 hours a day. In the morning, a snow shovel and a bucket of chemicals. In the evening, heavy wrenches, dismantling transmissions, and washing parts in harsh solvents. Yet inside him, the old internal resistance was gone. Humiliation and pride belonged to the past, burned away during his first weeks working in the parking lot. In their place had formed a quiet, stubborn anger at his former self, and a passionate desire to prove he was capable of more than just spending his father's money. Arthur continued to work with genuine human kindness. His first mechanical task was done up front, not on the side of a phone, but on the phone itself. It was also a case where old, written words of the box were read, blueprints laid out on the technical tablet in detail. He asked questions, clear, to the point, without a shadow of his past arrogance. Seeing such zeal, the tough mechanics gradually shifted their attitude toward him. "The kid's got a head on his shoulders," Uncle Kolya said to his assistant over dinner. The same dinner Arthur had in the same room, after an ideal valve was adjusted on a test engine in 3 minutes. "His hands are still a bit clumsy, sure, but he's got instinct. Don't worry, these golden boys are looking for something today." When the federal delegation arrived at the track, severe frost set in. A large-scale private testing session for new rain and winter tire compounds was underway across the complex. On the track, we saw the series' top drivers, engineering staff, and Federation officials. During test runs along the route, pig eggs could be seen. The air temperature was maintained in the new furnace, and the sky turned into a fine hail that instantly formed an icy crust on the asphalt. The goal of the star was practical and extreme. On this day, Arthur went to the pit boxes of the early tech region crew. There were no standard work clothes bearing the car emblem. In the spare wheel rim storage, tires could be rapidly prepped with hot mounting tools. On the track of the open Vorontsov Motorsports team, Mark arrived at the wheel, the same driver who had arrived 3 months ago, while other racers headed toward Arthur, where there were plenty of toilets. Mark read the driver's perspective, but didn't reveal the hot nature of excessive overconfidence. After 3 warm-up laps, Mark pulled safely into the pit box for quick suspension tuning and tire pressure adjustments. First, you need to handle battle mode, simulating a real race pit stop. "Go, go!" shouted the chief engineering officer into his headset. "Protect the tires, adjust the front wing, 10 seconds. Arthur was working on the front wheel and the clamping mechanism housing. The rear of the car had to be moved and secured the moment it stalled. You could safely approach the pneumatic jacks. A pneumatic impact wrench in hand tearing off the central nut. The rear wheel mechanics scaled up. Arthur had just one touch, then another. An automatic movement dropped the new rain tire to the ground. At that exact moment, as a new mechanic tightened the impact wrench, his foot slipped on the icy concrete of the pit lane. The man, clutching his head, but the heavy tool slipped from his hands into the shop. "Damn it, time!" yelled the chief engineer. The jacks were already lowering the car. If the wheel wasn't secured tightly, it would jam. The part had to be easily repairable in field conditions. Even though it was European, it wasn't worth the test schedule. Arthur didn't hesitate for a second. Reflexes built over a year, combined with physical conditioning honed by months of daily manual labor, acted faster than thought. Leaping across the icy pit lane markers on the ground, He caught the heavy tool midair, aligned it to the shaft, and hooked it onto the wheel lock. 2 pneumatic blasts sealed the nut to maximum torque. The car dropped onto its tires. "Go!" Arthur barked, slapping his palm hard against the carbon fiber nose of the car to signal the driver. Tires gripping and engine roaring, the car launched back onto the track. The entire emergency wheel swap had taken less than a second. For a moment, silence hung over the pit lane. The fallen mechanic picked himself up, clutching his bruised knee, and stared in disbelief at Arthur, who was kneeling in a dirty puddle holding the heavy impact wrench. The chief engineer walked over, pulled off Arthur's headset, and looked down at him. In the specialist's eyes, the preventive effect was clear. "What's your background, kid?" the engineer asked. "Garage number 3, Arthur replied, setting down the wrench and wiping oil from his face with his sleeve. "My mentor, Nikolai Vasilievich, trained us on speed builds every evening." The lead engineer rested his hand on Arthur's shoulder, his gaze shifting back to the telemetry monitors. From the team command post along the pit lane, Damir Vorontsov was watching. 3 checks showed on the board, with no need for staff reassignments. The track was monitored by Igor Seleznev. "Did you see that, Damir Nikolaevich?" Seleznev said softly. "The kid isn't fooling around with the tires. He works every day. If he hadn't reacted, the car would have stripped the assembly." Damir kept his eyes on the scene. Opening a window on his desk tablet, he pulled up Arthur Gromov's personal file. It contained 10 reports, from Stepan Kuzmich, from Nikolai Vasilievich in the 3-story garage, and from the safety car team. Not a single complaint, not a single infraction. No breaches of discipline, no reliance on family connections. "What are the financial audit results for Gromov Sr.?" Vorontsov asked, unscrewing his pin. "The board of directors has stabilized the business," Seleznev reported. "The bank debt has been restructured on schedule. Viktor Gromov works tirelessly around the clock. He transferred 30% of his shares to the charitable foundation without objection. The company is running smoothly." Damir signed a document and handed it to Seleznev. During the meeting, the billionaire foresaw the success of the initiative. "Arthur has been working at the track for 5 months, Damir noted. "It's time to see what the doctor says." He washed away his arrogance with his own sweat and blood. "What about his racing license?" Seleznev asked cautiously. "No," Vorontsov stated firmly. "A top-tier racing license isn't handed out for cleaning toilets or quick reactions in the pit lane. Once the race cools down, it will end soon. Note that there's no special treatment. He must forge himself into a hardened blade. Tomorrow, he takes the official assessment for an entry-level mechanic, grade 3 classification. He works his way up through the standard ranks like everyone else." "And the father?" "Summon Viktor Gromov to my office tomorrow at 9 in the morning, Damir ordered. "Now you can see what you are looking for." The next morning, inside the Vorontsov Group headquarters, Viktor Gromov stood before Damir Vorontsov. Over the past few months, the developer had transformed completely. The ostentatious luxury was gone. He wore a simple, well-tailored suit without unnecessary flair. He looked like a man who had faced ruin, stood near the edge, and found a solid foundation again. The office door opened, and Seleznev escorted Gromov Sr. inside. Damir Vorontsov sat at his massive desk. Before him lay the financial reports alongside Arthur's progress files. "Welcome, Viktor," Damir said calmly. Gromov took a seat, attentive and respectful. "Your company's performance for the last quarter is solid," Vorontsov began. "You fulfilled every condition. Supply chains are transparent, wage delays are eliminated, and environmental standards are met. You are operating within proper legal and ethical boundaries." "You opened my eyes, Damir Nikolaevich," Viktor replied softly. "When our financial cushion collapsed and bankruptcy loomed, you gave me a chance to rebuild the business properly within 2 years. I finally saw how much corruption and theft surrounded me before." "Your son is working with the mechanics in the pit lane now," Damir noted, his tone neutral. "He handled a critical situation well and earned praise from senior staff. His time as a cleaner is over. He's been promoted to grade 3 mechanic." Viktor froze, emotion welling in his eyes. Thank you, Damir Nikolaevich. You gave me back my son. The boy who was lost in luxury and entitlement is gone. He's becoming a real man through hard work." "Don't thank me yet," Damir said. "He earned this step himself." As for your company, full operational control remains with the board of directors. Your role as CEO is maintained as long as standards are met. The majority of dividend profits will continue funding the orphanage foundation. If there is a single attempt to revert to old schemes, both the business and your son's path here end permanently. Understood? Understood, Damir Nikolaevich. I give you my word and family honor. The past will never repeat itself. Leaving Vorontsov's office, Viktor Gromov didn't return to his executive suite. He headed straight to garage number 3 at the racetrack. Arthur was leaning over a stripped chassis, inspecting brake calipers. His new jumpsuit bore a simple fabric patch. A. Gromov, grade 3 mechanic. Viktor walked up behind his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Arthur turned around, his eyes meeting his father's. The distance that had separated them for years had evaporated. "You've been promoted, son," Viktor said quietly. "I know, Dad. Got the new patch today. Vorontsov restored my management authority over the firm," his father added. "But that's not what matters. What matters is who you are becoming. Keep moving forward." Arthur wiped grease from his hands with a rag and looked at his father. "When everything collapsed, Dad, I used to think money solved everything. I was wrong. Working here, building something real with people who master their trade. That's what actually matters. Nikolai Vasilievich and the crew showed me what respect really means." Stepan Kuzmich walked into the pit box, glancing at the father and son before calling out to Arthur. "All right, Gromov, break's over. Nikolai Vasilievich needs those assemblies prepped for testing. Let's move." Arthur smiled slightly, looking at the old supervisor. On it, Stepan Kuzmich promised. Later that month, the Federation announced the inaugural Courage Cup, a unique racing tournament created on Damir Vorontsov's initiative. The competition was designed specifically for technical staff, mechanics, engineers, and test drivers, rather than professional series pilots. Everyone competed on identical, base-spec vehicles where budget and sponsorship meant nothing. Success depended entirely on pure skill, physical endurance, and mechanical knowledge. When the entry list was posted in the technical center, the crew from garage number 3 gathered around the board. Listed near the top was an entry, Arthur Gromov. Crew, garage number 3. Category, junior mechanic/driver candidate. Arthur stood in the bay alongside his crew. Damir Vorontsov walked into the engineering hub to address the entrance. "Is your mindset ready, Gromov?" Vorontsov asked as the crowd parted. "This is your official opportunity. No sponsors, no custom modifications, no family capital. Just a standard baseline car and 8 grueling stages. If you slack off or fail, you return to basic maintenance duties permanently. Do you accept?" Arthur looked Vorontsov directly in the eyes, his stance grounded and firm. "I accept the challenge, Damir Nikolaevich. I'll prove my place on the track." Spring arrived at the Vorontsov Arena racetrack with a sudden thaw, rapid snowmelt, and heavy, lingering fog. By the start of the first stage of the Courage Cup, the air over the racing complex was thick with the smell of damp earth, warm asphalt, and high-octane exhaust. This tournament, established by Damir Vorontsov, became the main event of the sports season. Entering the grid were not pampered drivers with lucrative contracts, but the working crew, mechanics, engineers, test drivers, and safety personnel who poured their labor daily into maintaining the machinery. The competition rules were brutally simple. All drivers raced in identical, stock series cars with base engine and suspension settings. Any modifications, hidden tweaks, or telemetry guidance from pit engineers during the race were strictly forbidden. Everything hinged on personal skill, cold calculation, iron endurance, and the ability to feel the car's limits on a wet, slippery surface. Arthur Gromov was registered under number 13. He refused the services of professional coaches and personal physiotherapists who had previously accompanied him at every race. His race engineer and chief mentor was Nikolai Vasilievich, head mechanic of garage number 3. Every evening, after a 12-hour shift at the workbench, they analyzed past telemetry together, mapped optimal cornering lines on graph paper, and practiced rapid steering techniques in the pit box until late at night. "Remember, Arthur," Uncle Kolya instructed, tapping a thick finger on the track map. "Before, your father's money and the fastest car on the grid did the work for you. You could mess up a braking point and a massive engine would pull you through on the straight. Now everyone has the exact same engine. The winner will be the one who takes a calculated risk where others hit the brakes out of fear. But that risk must be measured to the millimeter. Overstep and you're in the barrier." On the day of the first qualifying session, a heavy rain front settled over the track. The asphalt turned into a mirror-like sheet of standing water.
Under these conditions, even a slight over-application of the throttle could cause an instant spin. Arthur drove car number 13 onto the pit lane. He wore a plain dark blue suit without a single sponsor logo. His helmet featured a simple matte finish. As he pulled down his visor, all that remained before him was wet asphalt, a field of 24 competitive cars, and grandstands packed with thousands of spectators.
In the VIP suite behind the panoramic window stood Damir Vorontsov alongside Federation Vice President Igor Seleznev. "What do you think, Seleznev?" Vorontsov asked quietly, tracking car number 13. "Can the kid handle the pressure?" Hundreds of his former peers are watching, waiting for him to fail. "He's changed, Damir Nikolaevich," Seleznev replied, checking his monitor. "He qualified third. He drives completely differently than he did 3 years ago. The nervous recklessness is gone, replaced by a disciplined, calculated style. He preserves his tires and reads track grip far better than many professionals." The roar of 20 engines shattered the quiet. The red gantry lights illuminated one by one and went out. Start. The field surged forward, kicking up massive plumes of roosting spray. Visibility into turn 1 dropped to near zero. Cars ran side by side at 200 kilometers per hour. In the very first chicane, 2 competitors made contact, sliding into the gravel trap and thudding into the tire wall. Arthur, starting from third, assessed the chaos instantly. He avoided the bottleneck on the inside line, taking a smooth, wide arc to carry momentum through the exit. The line allowed him to pass 2 tangled cars cleanly and take second place. Ahead lay car number 7, driven by Viktor Sokolov, a veteran factory test driver with 15 years of experience. Sokolov knew every square inch of the circuit, every bump and every seam in the pavement. He placed his car expertly, firmly shutting down every overtaking attempt at the braking zones. For 10 laps, Arthur held tight to the leader's rear wing, the gap between them never exceeding half a meter. Debris and bits of shredded rubber kicked up from Sokolov's tires struck Arthur's visor. In the past, Arthur would have lost his temper, made a reckless dive, and either crashed out or taken them both off. But now he operated with a calm focus forged through months of hard labor in garage number 3. He waited, noting every subtle sign of wear on his rival's car. By lap 12, Sokolov's rear left tire was overheating, causing the rear end to step out slightly on the exit of the tricky loop turn. On the 13th and final lap, the rain intensified into a torrential downpour. A wall of water hit the track. Most drivers instinctively backed off, wary of aquaplaning. "Now or never," Arthur whispered behind his visor. Entering the loop, Sokolov took a slightly wider entry to compensate for worn rubber. Arthur didn't brake where the others did. He braked 5 meters later, stomping the pedal right on the absolute edge of traction. The car slid on all 4 wheels, but with a precise, minimal steering correction, Arthur held it on the brink of control. His car sliced along the inside line, centimeters from Sokolov's side panel. On corner exit, Arthur was first to roll back onto the throttle. The engine screamed at maximum revs, and car number 13 surged onto the main straight ahead of the field. The checkered flag waved overhead. Victory. When Arthur pulled into the pit lane, the crew from garage number 3, led by Uncle Kolya, rushed out. The tough mechanics in oil-stained coveralls lifted him onto their shoulders, cheering wildly. Uncle Kolya slapped him hard on the back with a heavy hand. "Outstanding, Gromov. That pass was brilliant. Late braking at its finest. That's how we do it in the garage." Arthur pulled off his helmet, sweat dripping from his hair, his face lighting up with genuine joy. He didn't search the crowd for news cameras or VIPs. He turned to the mechanics and shook every man's hand. "This is our shared win, Nikolai Vasilievich," Arthur said sincerely. "If you hadn't rebuilt that gearbox last night, I wouldn't have made that final lap." Standing slightly apart from the cheering crowd was his father, Viktor Gromov. He kept his distance so as not to interrupt the team's moment, but his eyes shone with pride. Arthur spotted him, walked over, and embraced him tightly. From the pit building balcony, Damir Vorontsov watched the scene unfold. Igor Seleznev stepped up beside him with the official timing sheets. "A flawless drive, Damir Nikolaevich," Seleznev said. "Gromov executed both qualification and the race without a single error or penalty." "It's only the first stage, Igor," Vorontsov noted, watching Arthur help the crew push the car into the pit box. "The real test lies ahead. Over the coming stages, rivals will study his lines and target his weaknesses." We'll see how he holds up under sustained pressure. The next 3 months were a relentless, grueling campaign. The Courage Cup spanned 8 stages across various track layouts and extreme weather conditions, from scorching 40-degree heat to heavy gale force winds. Arthur drove with remarkable consistency, securing repeated podium finishes. He won on a bone-dry track through surgical precision, and during a wet-dry transition stage, he fought back from last place following an early puncture. Yet his main rival in the standings, Viktor Sokolov, refused to yield ground. Heading into the 8th and final stage of the championship, Sokolov and Gromov were tied on points. Everything came down to the season finale. The final stage took place in mid-May under ideal conditions: dry pavement, clear skies, and a light breeze. Over 30,000 spectators filled the grandstands, while Vorontsov Group media outlets broadcast the decider live across the country. Tension in the paddock was palpable. The garage number 3 mechanics rechecked every bolt on Arthur's car 3 times over. 10 minutes before heading to the starting grid, Damir Vorontsov walked up to the pit box. The mechanics stepped back to give the holding owner space. Arthur stood up from his bench. "Are you ready, Gromov?" Vorontsov asked, inspecting the young driver closely. "Ready, Damir Nikolaevich," Arthur answered cleanly, without hesitation. "Remember what we discussed before this tournament began," Vorontsov said. "It doesn't matter what resources you command. What matters is who you are when standing alone before a challenge. If you win today, you prove the old Arthur Gromov is gone, and a real driver and man has taken his place. I intend to win this race, sir, not to reclaim wealth or status, but for the crew that believed in me when everyone else turned away." Damir gave a sharp nod and extended his hand. Arthur met it with a firm, solid grip. The Courage Cup finale turned into a masterpiece of motorsport skill. For 20 laps, Gromov and Sokolov ran wheel to wheel, exchanging the lead repeatedly. It was fierce, unyielding, yet entirely clean racing between 2 master drivers. Neither pushed the other off track. Neither resorted to dirty tactics. With 2 laps remaining, Sokolov launched a decisive move down the main straight, pulling ahead by half a car length. Only the final sector remained, a complex sequence of high-speed S-bends, where a minor error meant losing position instantly. Arthur pushed into the chicanes at the absolute physical limit of the car. The chassis twitched, tires screaming under friction, sending up wisps of blue smoke. On the exit of the final bend before the home straight, Arthur lined up a mathematically perfect trajectory, caught Sokolov's slipstream, and pulled alongside with 300 meters to go. The 2 cars surged side by side toward the finish line, engines roaring at maximum revs. The judges required photo finish technology to determine the outcome. After 10 seconds of tense waiting, the massive track scoreboard flashed. Courage Cup champion, Arthur Gromov, car numer 13. Margins, 0,12 sekundi. The grandstands erupted into deafening cheers. The garage number 3 mechanics stormed out onto the pit lane, waving team flags. As Arthur climbed out of the cockpit, his rival, Viktor Sokolov, was the first to approach. The veteran test driver removed his helmet and held out his hand with deep respect. "Phenomenal drive, kid. You won it fair and square. You're a true racer." "Thanks for the battle, Viktor," Arthur replied, shaking his hand. The presentation ceremony took place on the main podium square. Damir Vorontsov personally presented the trophy, a massive cup crafted from polished titanium and dark carbon fiber. "Congratulations, Arthur," Vorontsov stated so all could hear. "You walked the full road from the bottom to the top. You erased your past dishonor not through empty words, but through dedicated work. I honor my promise. Your driver's super license is fully restored. From this moment on, you are officially authorized to compete in any racing series globally." Silence fell across the square as people waited for his response. Arthur held the trophy, looked out at the mechanics from garage number 3 standing in the front row, and then turned to Vorontsov. "Thank you, Damir Nikolaevich," Arthur said calmly. "This means a great deal to me, but my path isn't back to luxury racing." He took the microphone, his voice carrying clearly across the venue. "I am declining to return as a professional series driver. Instead, I am requesting to remain on staff as an engineer and test driver for Vorontsov Motorsports." Building these cars, working alongside the crew in the pits, and teaching young drivers that racing isn't about arrogance, but about collective effort, that is where I belong. My life is in the garage and on the test track. Arthur's words surprised the gathered press, but brought a nod of approval from Damir Vorontsov. Viktor Gromov watched from the side, wiping a tear from his eye. Before him stood no longer a spoiled youth, but a grounded, mature man. A champion's choice is respected, Vorontsov said, smiling faintly. Welcome to the engineering lead, Engineer Gromov. Later that evening, after the celebration subsided, Arthur sat by the entrance of garage number 3 with a hot cup of tea, reviewing telemetry logs on a tablet. His father walked up and stood beside him. Are you certain about turning down the ProDrive, son? Viktor asked softly. You worked so hard for that license. I'm completely certain, Dad, Arthur replied, looking out over the quiet, illuminated track. I used to think happiness was status and luxury. Now I know happiness is going to sleep with a clear conscience, respecting the people you work with and building something real. That's worth more than any trophy. Viktor placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a quiet moment of pride passing between them. 3 years passed. The transformation of the Vorontsov Arena complex and the Formula April racing series became legendary within the motorsport community. The principles of strict discipline, uncompromised quality, and genuine respect for every worker's labor, instituted by Damir Vorontsov, yielded extraordinary results. The complex evolved into one of Europe's premier technological racing hubs. Arthur Gromov was 27 now, serving as lead test engineer and director of the Youth Racing Academy under the Vorontsov Group holding. He wore a neat, dark blue team jumpsuit with engineering credentials. His hands bore small scars from years of hands-on mechanical work, reminders of his time spent cleaning, wrenching, and learning the trade from the bottom up. His daily routine began at 6:30 in the morning in garage number 3, which remained his operational base. Uncle Kolya continued to work alongside him as a senior master technician and trusted friend. Stepan Kuzmich, now retired, dropped by regularly with a thermos of tea, checking in on the crew and ensuring the bays were kept immaculate. The Youth Racing Academy, founded by Arthur and authorized by Vorontsov, operated on strict meritocratic principles. Cadets were selected based on talent, character, and physical discipline, rather than family wealth. Inscribed on a metal plaque at the academy entrance was the core rule Arthur formulated. Before taking the wheel and demanding respect, learn to respect the people who prepare your machine. A driver's journey begins not with the throttle, but with valuing the labor of others. Every new cadet spent their first 3 months in the maintenance block, cleaning bay floors, assisting mechanics, maintaining tools, and prepping practice cars. Only after earning a positive review from the senior mechanics were they permitted near simulators or track vehicles. On a warm May afternoon, a new intake of candidates arrived. Among them was 17-year-old Nikita, the son of a prominent energy mogul. The teenager arrived with a private security detail, wearing designer clothes and displaying clear disdain for the facility. He complained loudly about the modest technical quarters and demanded immediate access to a race car. Hey, old man, Nikita barked at a senior mechanic, wheeling a heavy cart of brake rotors down the corridor. Get this junk out of my way. Where's the VIP locker room? Why am I expected to change near maintenance staff? The mechanic paused, looking at the youth in silence. Arthur Gromov stepped out of the adjacent workshop, holding a tablet, his sleeves rolled up. Arthur walked over smoothly, his demeanor quiet, cold, and composed, reminiscent of Damir Vorontsov years prior. Who are you supposed to be? The teenager demanded, backing off slightly at Arthur's firm presence. I am the lead engineer and academy director, Arthur Viktorovich Gromov, Arthur stated calmly. And the man you just insulted is Nikolai Vasilyevich, a master technician whose work helps our team win international championships. The teenager scoffed, trying to maintain his bravado. I don't care who he is. My father paid a massive registration fee. I came here to drive race cars, not interact with mechanics. Get me the director. Arthur didn't raise his voice. He pulled out his phone, made a brief call, and spoke clearly. Igor Seleznev? Hello. Regarding candidate Nikita from today's intake, violation of Academy Code Item 1, disrespect toward technical personnel. Cancel his contract, revoke his pass,
and log a 3-year application hold. Refund the fee to the parent in full. Nikita stared in total shock. Are you crazy? My father could buy this entire facility. Do you have any idea who my father is? 3 years ago, I said those exact same words, Arthur replied quietly, stepping closer and meeting his gaze. I thought my father's money made me invincible.
I treated people with contempt, threw hot coffee at a worker, and thought I was above everyone. Then the man who owned this entire complex put a mop and a bucket in my hands and made me clean up my own mess for 5 months. It took me too long to realize how foolish I was. The corridor fell silent as the gathered cadets listened intent. Your father's money cannot buy you genuine respect, kid, Arthur continued. It won't buy you an extra 1/10 of a second in a wet corner either. Here, money is just paper. If you don't learn how to treat people decently, you will never drive one of our cars. Security will escort you out. The guards escorted the protesting teenager toward the exit. The remaining cadets stood in place, silent and attentive. Now listen carefully, Arthur addressed the group. You will be issued work gear, buckets, and cleaning supplies. Your first task is to clean Technical Bay number 2 until it shines. Anyone slacking off follows Nikita out the gate. Report to the supervisor. The cadets followed Stepan Kuzmich without a word of complaint. That evening, private testing concluded for a new eco-friendly racing powertrain developed by the Vorontsov Group engineering team. Damir Vorontsov visited the pit telemetry center to review the performance data personally with Arthur. Turbine pressure levels are stable, Damir Nikolaevich, Arthur reported, pointing to the telemetry graphs. Exhaust gas temperatures are down 12%. The engine is running perfectly. Damir reviewed the metrics, nodded, and turned to Arthur. I heard about your interaction with the energy mogul's son today, Vorontsov remarked. His father already called me, threatening to pull investments from our commercial construction projects. I apologize if that caused complications, Damir Nikolaevich, Arthur replied, grounded. But the rules are absolute. If we grant exceptions for money, the entire system loses its integrity. Damir offered a rare, subtle smile. You handled it correctly, Arthur. I informed his father that if he cannot teach his son basic manners, we have no interest in his investment. Your academy produces exceptional results, not just in lap times, but in building reliable, grounded individuals. Damir walked over to the window, looking out at the track as the test car completed its cool-down lap. Gromov Invest has fully settled its debt restructuring ahead of schedule, Vorontsov added smoothly. Your father runs a clean, highly efficient operation now. He told me recently that losing his old arrogance was the best thing that ever happened to his business. Arthur felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He remembered the dark evening on the cold, concrete parking lot years ago, begging for a chance. The road had been long, but it had led to real purpose. Thank you, Damir Nikolaevich, Arthur said softly, for everything. Money and position are simply tools, Arthur, Vorontsov reflected. In foolish hands, they cause destruction. In wise hands, they build something lasting. You learned the difference. As night fell, the track quieted down. Arthur changed into everyday clothes, jeans, a simple jacket, and sneakers, and walked along the pit lane one last time before heading home. Passing garage number 3, he saw his father waiting near the entrance, holding 2 paper cups of hot tea. Care for a cup, son? Viktor asked, handing one over. Always, Dad, Arthur smiled, taking the tea. They stood together near the finish line, watching the last ambient lights of the facility glow against the dark night sky. When you were younger, Viktor said quietly, I thought giving you everything meant giving you money and luxury. I was wrong. True value isn't found in bank accounts or sports cars. It's found in character, hard work, self-respect, and how you treat the people around you. Arthur placed his hand on his father's shoulder. We both learned that lesson, Dad, Arthur said. And that's what truly matters. Above the Vorontsov arena, the stars shone brightly in the clear night sky. The track rested in quiet anticipation of a new day, ready for the engines to roar once more.